Have you ever stayed in a relationship, a friendship, or even a job, not because it felt right, but because you needed it to be right? How many times have you told yourself, it's not that bad, just to avoid facing the truth that something deep inside you is quietly breaking? Let's be honest. Sometimes we don't suffer because of what people do to us. We suffer because of what we allow. Again and again and again. Not because we're weak, but because somewhere along the way, we learn to call dysfunction love. We confuse control for care, silence for peace, and pain for passion. There's a quote that hits deep. You're not hurting because of what happened to you. You're hurting because of what you kept tolerating. And this video, this moment, is not about blame. It's about clarity. About finally seeing what your soul has been whispering all along. Carl Jung, the legendary depth psychologist, didn't write to comfort us. He wrote to awaken us, to help us look into the darkest parts of ourselves, and finally name what's been haunting us. Today, we're going to explore 10 specific emotional and psychological behaviors that Carl Jung warned you about. Do not tolerate these. Not anymore. Because the truth is, what you allow becomes your reality, and what you normalize becomes your identity. So, if you're ready, really ready, to reclaim your emotional clarity, let's begin. Carl Jung's work was never meant to soothe you into staying asleep. It was designed to wake you up, to help you see the unconscious patterns that keep looping in your life, in love, in pain, in silence. He once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Think about that for a second. The arguments you keep having, the people you keep attracting, the things you keep forgiving. They don't just happen to you. They repeat because something inside you believes that's all you're worthy of. But here's the truth. Awareness is liberation. When you become conscious of the toxic patterns you've accepted, not just in others, but in yourself, you break the cycle. You start choosing differently, speaking differently, loving differently. So, as we walk through these 10 destructive behaviors Jung would tell you never to accept, I invite you to stay open. Open not just to judgment, but to understanding. To see these patterns not as failures, but as invitations. Because every moment of awareness is a step toward emotional freedom. And your journey, your healing, starts here. 1. Emotional manipulation disguised as love. It starts quietly. Maybe they say they care. Maybe they even say they love you. But somehow, every time you try to set a boundary, you end up feeling guilty. This isn't love. It's emotional control, wearing a mask. Carl Jung warned us, when the soul's truth is denied, it falls ill. When you're constantly made to feel like your needs are a burden, your soul begins to shrink. Your self-trust fades. You stop asking for what you need because you're afraid it might push them away. That's not a connection. That's conditioning. True love doesn't make you choose between your identity and your relationship, but manipulation does. It teaches you to abandon yourself, slowly, invisibly, in exchange for approval. And the longer you stay in that pattern, the more love starts to feel like walking on eggshells. That's not love. That's erosion. 2. Contempt masks honesty. We've all heard it. I'm just being honest. But when honesty feels like humiliation, it's not the truth. It's cruelty in disguise. Contempt is subtle. It often wears a costume of tough love or brutal truth. But beneath it is the need to dominate, not to connect. Carl Jung said, the personality needs affirmation, not erosion. A healthy relationship doesn't tear you down under the excuse of real talk. It uplifts while being honest. It speaks truth with compassion, not with daggers. When contempt becomes a dominant tone, you start doubting your worth and calling it feedback. You stop sharing your heart because you fear how it will be twisted. Criticism becomes a main form of communication, and connection gets lost. So remember, you don't grow from cruelty. You shrink. 3. Control packages protection. I'm just worried about you. I'm only doing this because I care. It sounds sweet until you realize you're no longer free to make your own choices. Control can wear the voice of concern, but underneath, it's often fear. And Jung understood this well. The shadow are hidden fears and insecurities. Loves to assert power under the guise of love. True love doesn't put you in a cage. It opens the door wider. If someone is constantly limiting your movements, silencing your voice, or questioning your independence, that's not protection. That's possession. And slowly, you start losing sight of the version of you that once felt alive, spontaneous, whole. Because when fear dresses up as care, you start mistaking confinement for safety. And that is emotional suffocation, not support. For gaslighting, the assault on your inner compass. Gaslighting is one of the most damaging psychological weapons. It's when someone repeatedly denies your reality until you start to question your own sanity. They'll say, "You're overreacting. That never happened. You're too sensitive." Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead to an understanding of ourselves." But here's the catch. You can't grow if your emotional compass is constantly being hijacked. Gaslighting traps you in a fog, a mental maze. You begin to rely on them to interpret what you saw, what you felt, even what you remember. Over time, you stop trusting your instincts. You look for permission to feel what you feel. And that is the beginning of emotional exile. A relationship should help you feel grounded. Gaslighting, it does the opposite. It disconnects you from your own truth, one subtle lie at a time. 5. Dismissal of your inner world. You share a dream, a hope, something that lights you up, and they scoff, laugh, roll their eyes. Maybe they call it silly, or childish, or unrealistic. And you tell yourself, maybe they're right. This is how it begins. The slow silencing of the soul. Jung emphasized the importance of honoring the authentic self. Our inner world, our creativity, passion, intuition, is not fluff. It's the foundation of our spiritual well-being. When someone repeatedly mocks or dismisses your inner world, they're not just being insensitive. They're telling you, what matters to you doesn't matter to me. And that message, when internalized, leads to deep self-denial. You start shrinking your dreams to avoid being mocked. You stop creating, stop sharing, stop imagining. Until one day, you realize you stop being you. 6. Chronic lack of empathy. There's a subtle but powerful kind of pain that comes from being emotionally invisible. You try to share what you're going through, your stress, your sadness, your dreams, and it's brushed off. You're told to get over it. Or worse, they make it about them. In relationships like this, your emotions are treated like a nuisance instead of a bridge to a deeper connection. Jung believed that without empathy, true intimacy is impossible. Empathy is the soul's meeting point. When someone consistently overlooks your emotional reality, you begin to silence yourself, not because you're healed, but because there's no room for your pain. And slowly, the relationship turns from a dialogue into a monologue. You speak, but nothing echoes back. This emotional starvation makes you shrink your truth just to maintain the illusion of closeness. But a connection that doesn't make space for your feelings isn't love. It's emotional abandonment. 7. Repeated betrayal wrapped in apologies. We've all heard apologies. But what happens when "I'm sorry" becomes a routine instead of a turning point? When someone betrays you, lies, cheats, breaks promises, and then apologizes without changing anything, that's not remorse. That's management. Jung said it clearly. Repeated behavior is never accidental. If someone keeps hurting you the same way over and over, it's not because they don't know better. It's because they know you'll tolerate it. A sincere apology leads to accountability and change. But when apologies become cycles, they numb your ability to trust, not just others, but yourself. You start doubting your own boundaries. You question your standards. You confuse loyalty with endurance. But a bond built on empty promises isn't a relationship. It's a revolving door of pain. 8. Selfishness disguised as independence. There's a difference between being independent and being emotionally unavailable. You may find yourself doing all the work, reaching out, initiating, showing up, while the other person floats in and out whenever it suits them. They call it space. But what they really mean is, I want your support without offering mine. Jung would call this a distorted, one-sided energy exchange, a connection where one gives constantly, while the other avoids responsibility under the banner of freedom. And here's the danger. You start thinking you're too needy. You start settling for crumbs, just to keep the bond alive. But true independence doesn't avoid intimacy. It honors it, while respecting boundaries on both sides. If you always feel like you're chasing someone emotionally, you're not in a relationship. You're in an emotional drought, and it's time to stop mistaking detachment for depth. 9. Sarcasm used as a weapon. Relax, I'm just joking. You've heard that, right? After someone makes a comment that stings about your appearance, your intelligence, your dreams. Sarcasm is often sold as humor, but when it leaves you feeling small or ashamed, it's not funny, it's hostile. Carl Jung once said that what we repress in the unconscious gets projected outward, and sarcasm is often repressed resentment wrapped in a punchline. It creates confusion. Should you laugh it off? Speak up? Ignore it? You're stuck in emotional limbo, because every joke feels like a jab. Over time, this kind of humor erodes your sense of emotional safety. You start second-guessing yourself, shrinking your voice, avoiding vulnerability, all in the name of not overreacting. But here's the truth. Sarcasm that wounds is not wit. It's a slow form of emotional corrosion. You deserve respect, not ridicule disguised as playfulness. 10. Emotional withdrawal as punishment. This one is deeply damaging and dangerously easy to miss. You have a disagreement, a tough conversation, or maybe you just express a feeling they don't like. Suddenly they go silent. They ignore your messages. They become cold, distant, absent, and the worst part, they don't explain why. This isn't emotional maturity. It's a manipulation tactic. Jung described this kind of behavior as a regression into the shadow, where instead of working through conflict, the person disappears emotionally to assert control. Withholding love, affection, or communication isn't needing space. It's a form of emotional punishment. It teaches you that if you speak up, you'll be exiled. That if you have needs, you'll be met with silence. And over time, you learn to suppress your truth to avoid being frozen out. But this emotional exile doesn't heal anything. It just reinforces insecurity and turns love into fear. So, why do we tolerate these behaviors? Why do we stay in cycles that drain us, hurt us, and leave us questioning our worth? The answer isn't weakness. It's unconscious loyalty to pain we haven't yet named. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow self, the hidden part of us shaped by wounds, fears, and unmet needs. Often, it's our shadow that clings to what's familiar, even when it's unhealthy. If you grew up believing that love means sacrifice, silence, or suffering, then dysfunction may feel like home. You'll call it endurance loyalty. You'll call anxiety passion. You'll confuse chaos for connection. But the truth is, love shouldn't feel like you're constantly proving your worth. You don't heal by staying where your pain is being repeated. You heal by recognizing the pattern and choosing to break it. Awareness isn't about judgment. It's about liberation. When you name what's been hurting you, you reclaim your power. When you draw the line, you don't become cruel, you become clear. This is not love. This is manipulation. This is not honesty. This is humiliation. This is not mine to carry anymore. You are not being too sensitive. You are not asking for too much. You are awakening to what your soul has always known. That love should feel like safety, not survival. Healing begins the moment you stop explaining away the pain and start standing up for your peace. So if this message resonates with you, take a deep breath and say it with me. I choose clarity over chaos. Let that be your starting point. Thank you for spending this time with me. If any part of this message touched something in you, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Share your truth, your experience, or simply type, I choose clarity over chaos. And if you believe someone in your life needs to hear this, please share this video with them. Make sure to subscribe for more content like this. Deep, honest, and soul-centered. Your healing matters, and this space is here for you.